Good afternoon. So welcome to today's colloquium. We have a special guest here with us today who will be formally introduced later on in the program. So without further ado, I want to formally introduce to the stage the managing producer of MDC Live Arts, Miss Jenny Pearson. So let's give her a round of applause as she approaches the stage.
Hi, everyone. It's always so nice to see honors students in your beautiful purple shirts. Thank you for being here today. As I was introduced, my name is Jenny Pearson. I'm the managing producer of MDC Live Arts. How many of you have heard of MDC Live Arts? How many of you have been to our performances before? And just shout out, well, one at a time. What have you seen? Trigger, Pelota? Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So, for those of you who don't know who we are the performing arts arm of the Cultural Affairs Department of the college. So the college has all kinds of cultural affairs programs, including the Miami Film Festival. Yes, we've all heard of that. Giant International Film Festival. And the Book Fair. Yay! So hopefully you'll all make your way down to the book fair as well this weekend. The other thing that's happening this weekend at Wolfson campus is performances by our guest artist, Miwa Matreyek. So you're going to hear from her today, and let me tell you a little bit how we got to her. So MDC Live Arts is a 30-year-old organization that's been presenting performing arts programs across disciplines, so music, art, theater, dance, music, performance art, multimedia, spoken word. We've been doing that by presenting artists who really sort of push the envelope, either aesthetically through their practice, through their discipline, or through the content of the work, addressing issues, frequently social issues or political issues. Like Pelota was mentioned, which was a piece we did here last spring, that was about immigration and Black Lives Matter. And then we did a Trigger with many of the North Campus students participating, which was an oratorio that addressed gun violence. So that was really great. And this year, we have launched a new initiative called Ecocultura, which is about addressing climate crisis or climate catastrophe through the arts. So using the arts as a platform and also a convener to affect change, and also to have conversations about how we live with it and also how we change it. So, it's these days our work is very much aligned with the college's change-making initiative, and we're very excited to be doing that. If you want to be a part of it, please think about being a student ambassador with MDC Live Arts, which you can find information about on our website at mdclivearts.org. The other thing you can find out about on our website is how to get free student tickets. So you are all entitled to free tickets to all of the MDC Live Arts performances with your valid student ID at the performance. So performances for the artist you're about to see are this weekend on Friday and Saturday at 8 and Sunday at 5. So, and that's also when the book fair starts on Sunday. So you might want to just sort of come on down to Wolfson and start your week off with the book fair and with Miwa Matreyek's performances in the Live Arts Lab. I think I maybe covered everything. I'll come back and talk to you again if I forgot anything. But definitely thank you all so much for all of your thoughts. We're going to have a Q&A after the presentation, and so start thinking now about what you want to ask or what you might want to comment. And I think another student is coming up now. Yes. So I'm going to turn the mic back over, and then we'll move on with the presentation. So thank you so much, And enjoy.
So thank you for definitely providing us with all the information about opportunities through NBC Live Arts, and for collaborating with us on bringing today's artists. So without further ado, I'm going to have your student host for today, Maideliz Gonzalez, come on up and formally introduce the speaker.
Mia Matraig is an animator, designer, and performer based in Los Angeles who has been an internationally touring independent artist since 2010. Coming from a background in animation, Matraig interacts with her moving images as a shadow silhouette at the cross-section of cinematic and theatrical, fantastical and tangible, handmade and tech. Matraig has performed her interdisciplinary shadow performances all around, including animation film festivals, theater performance festivals, art museums, science museums, tech conferences, and universities. Past presenters include TED, Museum of Modern Art, San Francisco's Museum of Modern Art, Lincoln Center, New Frontier at Sundance Film Festival, Future of Storytelling Conference, Walker Art Center, Wexner Center for the Arts, Red Cat, ISEA Conference, Anima Mundi in Brazil, and many more. Matraig received her MFA for Experimental Animation and Integrated Media from Call Arts in 2007. She's a recipient of her Sherwood Award in 2016, Creative Capital Award in 2013, and Princess Grace Award in 2007, and has taken part in residencies at MacDowell Colony and Headlands Center for the Arts. Matraig is also a co-founder and core collaborator of the multimedia theater company Cloud Eye Control. So let's give a nice warm welcome to Miwa Matraig.
Everybody. Yes, so I'm just going to aim this up a little bit. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. So I was curious out of the audience if there are people here that are studying art or animation specifically at all. One person, wow. Cool. As it was said in my bio, I come from a background in animation. That's what I studied in grad school at Cal Arts. It was a 3-year program, but I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar with Cal Arts, the art school. It's like 40 minutes outside of Los Angeles, but it's a pretty small art school that's basically housed in one building. So I went in thinking that I'd make just a bunch of short films and work in the animation industry, but through being in grad school in this like kind of small, intimate space, I mean, it's like 2,400 students, I think, at the time, so it's not like that small, but again, it's like kind of housed in one big building, much smaller than NDC, I think, because I hear it's a really huge university. But kind of being in that one building, it was kind of easy to kind of like cross paths with people from different backgrounds and kind of cross-pollinate, and that led me into collaborations that changed what I do as an artist from creating just animations to creating performances as animation, right? So normally I control the PowerPoint on my own laptop, so I might be skipping over a lot of slides because I kind of change it up based on the backgrounds of the students if they're animations. So yeah, you might kind of see me like skipping over stuff. But basically in terms of my background, these are the kinds of short films. This is just a still image, but the kinds of short films that I was making where I was working in collage, and often incorporating my body in the short film. So in this case, I was taking, footage that I shot of my arm and my eyes, or, like sometimes my full body, and incorporating it into these animated worlds. So I was always thinking about, when I was making short films, like, in a very kind of like gestural and performative and physical way, even when I was making films. Like this. Let's just actually skip over that. So I'll skip over some slides, but again, as I was saying, that I was often incorporating my body, and I was often like problem solving with my body too. I'm sure you guys know about like 3D CG like animation and software, like kind of like what Pixar does. And I took a few classes in that, but I kind of didn't really, like I didn't really like the look of it. I didn't really like the way of working. So I mostly work in After Effects. So I'm sure everyone knows Photoshop, right? Of course. And people are familiar with After Effects as well, or? So After Effects is basically the same kind of Adobe suite of software. And After Effects is basically like Photoshop plus animation. So you could take things that you've built in Photoshop and put it in a timeline and animate them in After Effects. So I'm often working with that, plus like, again, filming myself, and then sometimes green screen, sometimes rotoscoping, so actually like masking it out frame by frame to create the images. And in this case, there's a scene in this short film where my arm is spinning around like a wormhole in space. So if you imagine those arms actually just like going around, so that means that the arm is like, from all angles, right? So part of the process of making my work is like this problem solving of how do I get that footage, or how do I create that image or a movement. So, if I was a 3D CG person, I might like make an arm in 3D, like, like Pixar style, and then spin it around. But in my case, I filmed my arm on top of a box with like, actually just like this, like a hairband around my arm to cut it off, and then cut it out each frame so I can make it look like it's, shot from all angles and making it spin around. So it's like a very, lo-fi kind of solution, but again, like that kind of physical and gestural way of problem solving was part of the work. So again, I'm going to be skipping over a bunch of stuff. Some dance companies that I designed for. So that led me into creating work like you'll see if you come Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm showing this piece. I'm not performing, so I don't want to like give too much away from what you will be seeing, but I'll talk about this one. Actually, I don't know if you could get some of the light off of that part, like of the screen itself, and keep light on me, maybe, if it's possible. Sure. So for my own stuff, it's solo work that I create on my own. So I create all the animation, I also perform with it, I travel with it as a one-woman show. And so only the music is by someone else. I'm not composing and performing the music and recording it. But it's basically, my creations. And here, I'll go back. So I'm not sure if you could tell what's happening in the image, but there is a screen on stage, right? And you can't see it in this picture very well, but there is a front projector, like right in front of the audience, and there's a rear projector behind the screen. So I'm behind the screen. The image from the rear projector I am using to cast a shadow onto the screen, and then using the front projector to put images into my shadow because I'm putting light in the shadow, right? So that is just the setup for the whole show, but through that like very simple kind of technical setup, I'm able to create pretty complex illusions of like transformation and movement. So I'll show like a short 2-minute video of this piece that I'm not performing here, but it'll give you a pretty good idea of the kind of work that I do. So I think.
Such whiskers, such clean water pours out.
Yeah, that's just like I think it's like a little bit over 2 minute like reel. So, like edited clips of the piece that's 30 minutes as a full from beginning to end that I performed. I performed at a lot of festivals and stuff like that. So as you saw from the video, the very beginning of the piece, I'm in front of the audience. So the shadow is actually cast from the other side. So in this case, the blue kind of color is coming from the front projection. I'm creating a shadow with that. And then I'm using rear projection to put that timeline in my hands. And because the light is coming from a different source, I'm not casting a shadow over it, right? So again, like that kind of shows you in a very kind of simple way the layering of the images, but I could create much more complex illusions with that technique. And this piece is about the history of the Earth. So it starts with the Earth as like a ball of fire and like lava into the atmosphere is forming. And you'll see, so this is not what the audience sees, but I'm just putting it there as context, again, of like, how I'm creating the shadows. So creation of the atmospheres into the oceans, into like life, like amino acids in this scene, into like life, and kind of trying to be very true to the evolutionary timeline of the Cambrian Ocean to the Ordovician forest to, so again here. And the second half of the piece is sort of like the complex world that we've created of humanity and nature. So you saw a little bit in the video clip, but there's a scene where I come out to like a dinner, like a table set with dinner with like a roasted chicken, and salads and breads and stuff like that. But all the food kind of like jumps back in time. So kind of thinking about where our food comes from, and in a very kind of like metaphorical way. Like I'm not being like completely literal and precise, but like into farms, into like forests being cleared. So kind of integrating these kinds of symbolic and metaphorical storylines that thinks beyond the moment in the animation. And yeah, that timeline is sort of like a theme that is like bookends in the piece from the beginning to the end. So I'm gonna have to skip over. And then, okay, so I'll talk about this scene. You saw it a little bit in the video too. So there's a moment where I bring out the timeline and I'm holding it in between my arms, and the timeline fills up with, there's actually a little bit more before this that I kind of scroll past, but like basically the evolution, right? So you see like dinosaurs into mammals, and you don't see a person, but it's suggested that they're there. And like an image like this, for me, is trying to illustrate through body and the visuals and performance of an idea that, if you took all of evolutionary time in your the length of your arm span, then human history is like a tiny sliver. Like humans are a very recent species, but through the process of us being here, we're kind of erasing evolution that happened before us. And we didn't make the dinosaurs go extinct, obviously, but there is like a lineage of biological innovation and evolution that led to the world that we are in now. I mean, like dinosaurs, like evolved into like birds and other reptiles, lizards, and stuff like that. And through the extinctions that we're causing, we're kind of erasing this richness of diversity. So that is what I was trying to illustrate in that scene through, again, performance and visuals. And in the work, there's no text, so it's kind of like much more of like a poetic kind of dream-like impression, but hopefully that's something that the audience gets. So again, I'm going to be kind of skipping over stuff because I can't skip over folders. All right, so then I'll also talk a little bit about the collaboration that I started at CalArts that evolved into a theater company. So when we were in school, I started collaborating with someone from the theater department, the theater directing student named Chi Wang Yang, and Anna, who was in the music composer and performer program. So it was the three of us, me from animation and those two. And from our first year, we started making short performance pieces that were 15 to 20 minutes long, using projection, performance, live music, and stuff like that. And we were basically doing it as an extracurricular activity. Like it wasn't we weren't getting credit for any specific class to make this, but we were just like really interested in making this, and it kind of became our thing. So every year we would spend like 3 or 4 weeks just like really getting into it after, like when we could find the time, and just kind of putting on our own shows. And because we were across 3 different departments, we were able to kind of find resources to the 3 different departments, like, using projectors from the film school, using equipment, and asking, someone in the theater department to help us build something out of scrap metal that was, in the shop. Using like the music recording equipment for her to like record stuff that she would sing over and stuff like that. And also using like classrooms as rehearsal spaces after hours, when like classes are over. But so this came out of that collaboration. By the time we graduated, we had 3 short pieces, and I had a solo piece that was my thesis in the animation department. That was a performance similar to what I showed you with the shadow, but a little bit simpler. So by the time we graduated, we had, between Cloud Control, the 3 pieces, and my own, we had 4 pieces that we could start putting out to festivals. And I think that was really important for us that, from right after graduation, from a month after, we were starting to tour in terms of showing it at animation festivals and performing arts festivals. And, at first it was like just a little bit, but through that, getting artist residencies. So that means, being able to we were invited to spend 3 months in Portland to make a new commission piece, right? So we got funding and we got a place to live and a studio space to make something new, as well as like other kinds of grants that we were getting because we had work already and some history of showing the work. So that was kind of really helped us like start, getting our foot on the ground with being independent artists. So jumping back to my history, because of that, the collaboration kind of turned into a theater company, and we were making longer, evening length, kind of multimedia opera type work. So this piece we made in 2015. I'll show a little video. Again, it's like an hour-long piece that's condensed to 2 minutes. All right. Oh, so I was talking about how for my piece, I create all the content and I perform with it, except for the music again. So it's a very, small scale, although it takes a long time, process. Whereas for the theater company, it's a much bigger production in terms of, like in this photo, you see me. To the right of me is Anna, the composer-performer who also performs in the piece and writes all the music for it. Chi Wong, the third collaborator, is taking the photos. He's out of frame. But we have a costume designer. We have a producer who is like securing rehearsal spaces and some funding and like organizing. On Skype with a little icon was a lighting designer. We have a video programmer and we have a set designer. So just like the scale of production was very different between my own stuff and the group stuff. And for the group stuff, yeah, you could see kind of, not sure if this means much, but I explained the setup of mine, which is like front projection, screen, and rear projection. For Clouded Control's work, we're using 6 projectors, we're using 2 rear projection screens and set pieces, and also theatrical scrim. Oops, so these are the kinds of crates that we have to ship everything in. We had 2 of these. Sorry, I have to skip a lot of stuff. Because normally I would have it in a folder and I pick the images. But so this is an image from the piece. And so scrim that we have, not sure if it's like very easy to tell what's happening in this image, but there's 2 rear projection screens, and that's like kind of the redder images in the back. And there's a performer with like theatrical lighting on them, and there's panels of scrim in the front. And scrim is like a mesh fabric. Similar to if you had like a screen door on your house, and it's like that kind of grid kind of mesh, and you can see through it, right? But it does catch an image. Like if you project a bright image on it, it does catch the light, but then you can also see through it how you can see through a screen door. So that was a material that we were playing with to create these layers of projection. And so this piece, Half-Life, we originally started working on it in 2011. It was like a 4-year process of working on it a little bit, thinking about it, talking about it, and then kind of like we get busy with other stuff and we didn't have space, so we were so it was like a kind of a long process of production that led into, I think we worked on it pretty solidly in 2014, kind of taking all the things that we had been working on in the years before to have the premiere in 2015. But this piece is about, it was inspired by the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. So that happened in March, and then we started working on the very, very, very first kind of exploration of this piece that summer. So it was like very present in our minds. And especially because we're all based in Los Angeles, and we did a residency to do the first idea production in the San Francisco area at a residency. So, like at that time, 2011, when the nuclear disaster happened, us on the West Coast were very nervous about like, what does that mean? Does that mean like, radioactive materials like coming to the air? Is it coming to the ocean? And there was like that graph of like that image of like the radioactive like cesium, whatever, like, coming to the currents, right? I'm not sure if that was familiar on this side of the coast because it was like ever present on the West Coast. And there was definitely like this kind of very hypochondriac kind of fearful feeling on the West Coast in terms of like, when they tell us that it's safe, like what does that mean? Like what are they measuring, or how, like it's something you can't see. And I remember there being like a run on for like Whole Foods to buy iodine pills at that time because, iodine is, I believe can like, if you have ingested, like if you breathed in or ingested some radioactive materials, they can actually like kind of absorb it to get out of your system. But I remember like going to the Whole Foods and realized that they were all out, like me kind of catching on a little bit late. So there was like definitely like this hypochondriac energy of like fear and nervousness. So this piece kind of pulling from that kind of energy, so we say it's inspired by the Fukushima nuclear disaster, but it kind of became more about fear in a world that and like contamination and like kind of the ideas of like keeping things out and keeping things in. So this piece has 2 characters, one who is at a site of some sort of mysterious kind of cataclysm and a disaster. It's not specified, but she kind of becomes an embodiment of this disaster. And as she kind of moves through space, through forests and into the ocean, she is spreading this contamination. And she like crosses the ocean to come towards this other character who is basically kind of the West Coast kind of embodiment of, so you have to skip over a bunch of slides. Because some of these I use for like animation classes to talk about the process. So this is her crossing the ocean, right? And again, I mean, you'll see some images of like inspiration and stuff like that, and like production photos, which I won't really talk about. So there's that image I was talking about, referring to. Sorry. So the second character is someone who is like constantly measuring herself and like checking on her health. Let me skip a few more. Yeah. Okay. So so her house is like kind of a, like you imagine it as sort of a futuristic smart home where in this case she is using, so this is like two different scenes like next to each other because you see her twice. But in this case, the scrim almost being like a user interface that she could touch, and when she touches it, activates with like animation of like something that's like scanning her body and a very kind of symbolic, like it's not specific, but you know, kind of like giving her like biometric readings, as well as using in the other part of the image, using live camera to do face tracking as also part of the storytelling about her kind of like health consciousness. And that's also like a very LA thing too, sort of the health conscious kind of vibe. But so again, like kind of using technology as like storytelling tools that's integrated into the piece. So like we feel like with this piece, oops, sorry, you have to see that. With this piece too, we're kind of thinking about environment and like storytelling and kind of the world around the characters as a character in itself too. All right. So I'm gonna skip over a bunch of stuff and get to, so a lot of these, yeah, like for example, like when I'm skipping through them, there's like things that we found that were so like inspiration and references, visual references into like things that we built per scene. But I'm not really talking about it, so I'm just gonna skip over. Okay, so I wanted to jump ahead to the current piece that I'm performing this weekend for NDC Live Arts. And so this is back to the shadow silhouette performances, like I showed you in the first piece. And the piece that I'm performing, called Infinitely Yours, is inspired by headlines like this that I was seeing in like over the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm sure these kinds of things are familiar in terms of like climate change and human impact on the natural world, right? I'm sure here you were like kind of seeing a lot of headlines about like sea level rise, and it's something that's maybe kind of ever present in your psyche as well. So for myself, in terms of like the work, this piece Infinitely Yours, I was kind of building a catalog of all these kinds of articles. I like to use a software called Evernote, or an app called Evernote. Where I could build like a notebook and like put all these in these kind of stickies and like bookmark them. And you can also search them later too if you tag them. You can like insert videos and like, you know, podcasts. So it just became like a way that I can mentally bookmark a bunch of different ideas and also visual references like photos and stuff like that as a way to kind of world build and think about like the larger kind of whole world that I wanted this piece to be about. And also some of the reading that I was doing at that point. So I'll kind of go through some of the books. This one is a more recent book that came out about like animal agriculture and how that's affecting climate change. Oh, so I won't do that. And then through the kinds of headlines I was reading, I started, again, like with the cataloging of all this information and ideas, started building these kinds of sketches. So I studied art, but I kind of like never was like much of an illustrator. I kind of would rather make stuff in the computer. So like I don't make like super refined drawings. But for example, you know, like I was thinking about like overfishing and like depletions of the oceans. to like trash and like landfills. That scene over there, I was thinking about like death and kind of like being held by the earth, both in life and in death. And in the piece itself, with the shadow performance, it ends up becoming scenes like this. Although that one's not in the piece yet. It was kind of more of a test for something that might be added on later. But again, like, you know, overfishing, like fish getting caught into a net, and like an earth. It's a little bit hard to tell because it's a very small image, so it's a bit compressed, but, you know, like overfilling with trash. So yeah, kind of the process of that. And with this piece, I was really thinking about like ideas of like both individual, like my personal experiences, as well as what we experience in like a larger scale as like wholes of humanity, and sort of like a metaphoric kind of symbolic way. Like, for example, this is just something that I found, but it does say the source is from the World Bank, so I hope it's like pretty accurate. I'm not sure what year it is, but they say that Americans produce about 4.4 pounds of trash a day, like a day. So in the piece, and you know, this is like the amount of plastic that we create. It's from Reuters. And I think this is like literally just like plastic bottles. Like every day we create that much. And there's a really cool interactive infographic about this on the Reuters graphics. It's like, I just have a few frames, but it tells you like per minute, per hour, per day, per year, stuff like that, since plastic bottles were first made, like how much we've actually made, you know, plastic bottles. So like that kind of stuff also manifested into the piece, including, you know, what I was saying about the 4.4 pounds of trash and stuff that we just put into the trash can and it disappears and so it goes somewhere and we don't know, you know, like we don't think about it. But like in this scene, again, in a very kind of symbolic, metaphorical way, like what does it feel like for your body if like all this trash actually literally came out of your body? Or like ideas of like drowning in like a plastic-filled ocean, right? So there, like I was saying, like experiences as an individual versus sort of a symbolic experience of like a larger idea that I'm trying to illustrate. Again, for example, you know, like an individual experience might be being stuck in traffic, right? And like I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. And you know, especially me coming from LA, I'm like stuck in traffic pretty often. But so that's like an individual experience, but as our collective experience, in a very symbolic kind of way, like a scene that I wanted to create was where this like large figure goes and like sticks her hand into the ground and pulls out oil and like kind of starts to eat it. And that's, again, sort of like a dreamlike kind of symbolic kind of interpretation of what we are doing as individuals, but as a collective, in a, again, in kind of a nightmarish way. Like I feel like that's kind of what we're doing in terms of our consumption. Sorry, no preview. And also, as part of making this piece, it was making me have to confront a lot of, and I'm sure that this is your experience too, that in terms of like, you know, the headlines you're reading or the sea level rise, like kind of questioning and, you know, like processing through your daily life. Again, like, do I drive to campus? Is there public transportation options? I think those are all kind of like part of what we have to like process through. And part of my process was that, I mean, there's just 2 photos here. There's actually a few more that I have, but I don't have it in the slides. That per month, I started to do a plastic trash audit. So I was going into my recycling, and I was just setting aside all the plastics. So I wasn't doing this with like paper or glass or, you know, like cans. But I was setting aside all the plastic packaging type stuff and saving it for a month so I could see what the volume of it and the choices that I made that month. And that was actually really interesting. In some ways to help me cutting back on plastic packaging and like, you know, yeah, like consuming plastic just to put into recycle bin, especially now that, you know, there's been in the news about how for decades we've been shipping plastics to China and now it's not taking it, so it's just like getting burnt or going into landfills, right? I mean, it's a very complex and, yeah, awful situation. But, so I was trying to be very intentional about reducing my plastic. But at the same time, like looking at things like this and the choices that I made that month, with keeping in mind that in some ways I was trying to reduce plastics. I was like, well, how do I get tofu that's not in plastic? Like, are there options? And I think, like for me, part of the process is also grappling with that and seeing where I do have power and where I don't, and what that means in terms of like, well, if I can only buy tofu in plastic, do I stop eating tofu at all? Like, I mean, that's a choice I can make. Do I learn how to make it? Which is like a whole another process. Or do I just accept that every month I'll have a little bit of tofu in plastic, but I'll avoid other things? And I did start going to like farmers market with a much more like intentional kind of like plan for the week out of the stuff that I bought there, or like going to bulk bins, like how they have at Whole Foods, and like I think like some like normal grocery stores like Vons or Publix probably has it too, like bulk bins, where you can just get it bulk and put it in your own bags or jars, right? So just trying to be intentional about that, but also the limitation of it, where if I'm traveling and a flight is like delayed for 4 hours and I really have to buy, like a sandwich in the airport, like I'll end up getting a container. And I think like part of the process is that kind of grappling with your choices and decisions that you make. But yeah, this has been like pretty insightful for me. And also part of something that was insightful for me, and this isn't like a promotion of the website, but there is a website in the book called Project Drawdown that I've been looking at that has like all these kind of solutions listed on it. So I would really recommend you look at that website, Project Drawdown. But it does, so drawdown is the idea that, right now we're increasing the amount of carbon that we're putting into the air. And there'll be hopefully a tipping point where we start to go down, right? So that is like the point of like bringing down, draw down of the carbon. So this website, again, I've looked at it some, but I would encourage anyone to go check it out, especially if you're like kind of feeling overwhelmed, because there are some like interesting solutions about what are the top solution possibilities and how much impact does that have. And it also kind of lists things that has some complications and risks too, because I think it's also, again, about like grappling with choices along with its effectiveness, like how much infrastructure needs to change in order to make this happen, and also like some of them have risks. So I think, how am I on time?
You have like 8 more minutes.
Oh, okay, I think I'm kind of towards the end.
You can start the Q&A.
Okay, yeah, so I think with that, we'll go to a Q&A, and I'm just putting this slide here for the shows that's happening on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at the Wolfson Center at the MDC Live Arts.
At the Wolfson campus, the MDC Live Arts Lab is in Building 1. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something? Oh. So we hope you all join us for the performances. It's 8 o'clock Friday and Saturday night, and 3 on Sunday. Don't forget to go to mdclivearts.org and click on the MDC community link to find out how to get your free tickets. Why am I standing behind you all? I'm sorry. And we hope to see you at the show. So now we have some time for you all to share your thoughts and questions. We have a microphone here, and so that's really the best thing we can do. So if you can all come and stand in line, and then you can know what the order will be for asking your questions. Should I start off, or just nobody's jumping? I know you guys. I know honors students. I know you have awesome questions bubbling inside your heads. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sabrina. I'm a business major and I'm a second year. So I have a question. How long does it take you to develop one of those performances, like the art, the performance? Like,
sure.
How long does it take you?
Yeah. So like the solo stuff that I was talking about, so this piece and the one that I showed you the clip of, like they tend to take me like over 2 years. Like, I mean, wow. Like over 2 years, but not necessarily like I'm working the whole time, because there's often like, I get like other projects. But it normally takes me over 2 years of just kind of like chewing over ideas. And within that 2 years, I would say that about like 1.5 years or a year is like really sitting down at a computer and like working almost like full-time every day. And it is sort of like a lab, like, I was talking about like problem solving as part of the process. So there are a lot of things where I test an idea, I'm like, well, that's not really interesting. So there's kind of some trial and error in the process as well. And with the solo stuff, with the front projection screen and the rear projection, which you'll see if you come to the show, I can set that up in my living room because I have a pretty big living room. So it is like a very integrated process where I would, build like a small clip of an animation before I make the full thing and then test it out and videotape myself. So I kind of get a sense of how I'm performing in this space and using that to fix the animation further and then like keep going back and forth. So it's not like I make all the animation first and then I'm like, okay, so how do I perform in this? It's like a very integrated process. And then once I'm done, it's like really about touring. So it's, and I'm kind of at the beginning of that in a way, but Infinitely Yours hasn't premiered yet, and I would consider it like maybe 90%, a little bit over that done, but I'm still in the process like refining it and maybe adding like a little bit at the end. So I'm still kind of in that production process right now.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Hi, I'm Karen DeVell. I'm a music major, and I was wondering how long are your performances usually? Like, what's your max limit and what's your minimum limit? And also, how much of a physical task is it to perform with your art?
Okay, great. So this piece, Infinitely Yours, right now it's running about 22 minutes, but I think I'll get it up to about 25 once I'm like fully done with it. I said it was like 90% complete. The other piece that I showed you a video of, the History of the Earth one, is 30 minutes. For Clyde Control's work, they're 60 minutes. So Clyde Control's work, like each piece is like, like we have 2 pieces that are 60 minutes. That's like an evening length show, right? Because part of it also is about the business of touring, that presenters want like a full length show, which should be about an hour. Like if they were gonna get an audience to come see a piece in a theater, it should be about at least an hour. Or if it's longer, there's an intermission and stuff like that, right? So for my own stuff, I normally pair 2 pieces. So it's like about like 50 minutes-ish, normally for the Q&A, so I can fill up that time. Because otherwise, without doing like a double feature kind of package, it's really hard to book it. Sorry, I think that was maybe one of the questions, but was there some?
The other one was, how much of a physical task is it to perform?
Okay. So like for my own stuff, it is like basically choreographed. So it's music by friends. Hopefully I get it early on so that I can animate to it. For one of my pieces, actually one of the pieces I'm performing for this was all original music, or mostly original music. And that was a whole different process. But because it's choreographed, it's basically like a dance. And it's not too much work. I mean, like part of the whole thing is that I have to travel with like 3 suitcases full of equipment. I have to load in, which takes me about 2 hours to set up everything up in a space, doing a show, and then like striking is about like an hour, and it's like packing everything back up again. So it's actually like a very travel tour ready show. But it is like labor to have to show up. Instead of it being, as an animator, I could have made a whole bunch of short films that just like goes in a can of film, or just at this point just like files that I send through emails and plays in film festivals all around the world, right? But because this is a performance, I have to actually do the labor of traveling and staging the show, performing in it, and often doing some engagement stuff too. In terms of like the actual piece, the labor, I mean, it's not too bad. I mean, I built it, so I made it like pretty natural to my body. For the piece that I showed the video clip of, there's one scene where I made it way too long, but there's like 2 minutes where I'm basically doing Pilates. So that part is really hard. Because I have to like balance on my butt and have both like my legs and my arms out. But that's at the end of the show. So that's like, like the, yeah. But besides that, it is everything. It's choreographed. I know everything to like muscle memory, but it also, I built it to be pretty natural to me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Christina. I wanted to ask, because these projects that you have showed us, like they have a lot to do with like the environment and climate change and stuff like that. And I wanted to ask if you were thinking of like any future productions like about like other topics, like something different that you're also like passionate about.
I don't know. I think right now I'm so in the thick of this project that I'm still completing that it's a bit hard to think past. And I would say that as an animator and visual storyteller, what I'm interested in, what I'm really strong at, is to create these kinds of metaphorical worlds and environments. So I would love to work on projects that, either in collaboration or of my own, that can really bring out that strength or continue to bring out that strength. But I don't, yeah, I think I'm so in the thick of this right now that it's hard to think a little bit beyond it. But yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Gabriel. I'm a computer engineering major, and I just wanted to ask, which came first in your career? Did you decide that you wanted to do animation, or did you decide that you wanted to do performing arts? And at which point did you decide to put the two together?
Sure. Yeah, so when I started at CalArts, I was an animation major. So I really thought, it was like, oh, I'll just like learn animation skills, make short films and work, I don't know, like at an animation company. But because I started collaborating and I started moving more into performing arts, and it was really helpful that I had that collaboration too, because there were a lot of ways in terms of like being a business as like a independent artists or performers, like a theater company, that we figured out with our 3 brains as opposed to like one person. Like if I was an animator who suddenly had to figure out how to tour, I would not know how to do that. But because it was the 3 of us, and one of us was a theater person too, there was a lot more insight about, oh, well, you have to make like contracts, you have to make like floor plans and tech diagrams, which I showed you one of like, you know, the setup of the cloud control. So those are the kinds of things that you need as part of the production of like touring and showing it to presenters so that you get booked, right? So it was really important to have that as like something that we figured out was the group that I can also apply to my own. So I figured out how to kind of like find the path with my own performing arts too. And another thing is that as a filmmaker, you know, I wouldn't have to travel. I could just send files through emails and Dropbox and have it play all over the world. But normally you don't get money for that. Like sometimes there's a small like screening fee or like an honorarium, but filmmakers don't really make money from showing in film festivals. They make money from like film distribution, or often animators that I know from school, like, you know, it's like they do some freelance professional work and then they like try to make their own films like on their own, right, out of like money that they saved. As opposed to as a performer, I am able to make an income every time I perform, like partially because I'm actually having to show up somewhere and put in the labor of doing the show, but also because it's like a unique performance that can only happen in front of audience. So I do get a performance fee, and if I am able to, in a touring year, put enough of that together, I can actually support myself. And that's also especially because I'm a solo as opposed to 10 people in a traveling company having to split the money. I think this covers kind of what you were talking about in the question, but yeah, so it was interesting. And it was, some of that wasn't even intentional. It was kind of like, I just started going this way and then like figured out how to make it work. But I think it was lucky that I'm in the place where I can actually make an income from the art rather than, yeah, it would have been hard as a filmmaker. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a photography major. I wanted to know, what's the most challenging part of your process?
A challenging part of the process? I don't know. I think part of what I enjoy about making the work is sort of the challenge and the problem solving. I think there's a lot of things, there's a lot of moments where I want to create a certain image, and it might be hard to create what I imagine in my head, but then through kind of getting certain kinds of footages and stuff like that to create the image, I often feel like I can actually get somewhere close to what I imagined. So I would say maybe that's part of the challenge, and also like what I find really fun about making the work.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I have a question dovetailing onto the question about which came first, animation or performing. I'm curious to know, like in terms of the impulse as an artist, how did they both arise? Like as a visual artist, as an animator, and I believe you said also maybe graphic design, or that was a different conversation. So as a solo visual artist, going from this place of the relationship with a drawing or 2D, where did the impulse to have a relationship with an audience, live audience, come from? Or if you can find that or think about that.
I think the impulse wasn't natural to me because
say wasn't or was?
Wasn't, yeah. Because as an animator, I think like one of the things about animators is that, especially when you're making your own films, it's a very solitary kind of hiding in a cave for months kind of practice. And I definitely have that when I'm making my own solo stuff too. It's like, I'm just in my studio all day and like barely leave the house often. But in terms of like being a performer, I mean, I think something that lets me be a performer is that I'm performing in shadow. So I am kind of hidden from the audience. And I think that was my entry point to performance for myself. Like, I wouldn't want to be up here, like, giving a monologue. Like, I would never want to do that, like, as a performer. But because I am part of an image that I've crafted and I'm part of my own world, it lets me become a performer.
That's really interesting. So it's almost like you're saying it's still visual art, it's still two-dimensional visual art, except that you're doing it with your body instead of like a pen or paintbrush or a mouse.
Yeah, and again, as an animator, it is very interesting for me to think about the performance in a very cinematic way, in terms of, like, you might see it when you come see the show, but it is happening on the screen, and because I am a shadow, I'm also flattened onto the screen, right? And I could do things with my body that I can't do if I'm standing in front of you. Like, I can, because it's a shadow, I can get closer to the projector and make my hand really big and like do like zoom ins and stuff like that, which I can't do if I'm physically in front of you. I can make my body like much bigger than it is right now and then shrink down again, which I can't do. So I am also able to think about my body in a very cinematic way, which I wouldn't be able to if I was, again, like a performer in front of you. And I am thinking about composition and sort of like cinematic tropes of, jump cuts, zooms, pans, and how that works. And like POV shots too, which I think there was a little bit in there that I'm not sure if you caught, but there's a scene where you see my feet as if I'm like looking down at my own feet in shadow. And things like that I can play with. And that's, again, going back to sort of the problem-solving thing. But like things like that I can think about because I come from an animation and film background that maybe I wouldn't have thought of if I was just in performance.
That's really, really interesting perspective into performance. So I have one more question, unless one of you all has another question. Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Anybody? Okay. Going, gone. So my question is, you mentioned that Infinitely Yours is not done yet, and you said it's 22 minutes, and you're hoping to make it 25. So I guess I'm curious to know, as a creator, as someone composing work, how do you know when something is done?
That's hard. I think part of when you know it's done is when you've done like a lot of work and the deadline comes up and you're like, this just needs to tie up. I think also part of it is like the emotional satisfaction of like where you've gotten the piece to and sort of like an emotional arc that you're able to achieve. I think for me, for the piece Infinitely Yours, that you'll hopefully see, I do want there to be an ending that has like a little bit more hope. Like right now where it ends is like at a very kind of doom and gloom kind of really intense place. And that could be the ending, but I am interested in kind of taking it a little bit somewhere else. So that's what I'm kind of leaving myself open for right now. And again, that's about the emotional story arc. I mean, so the piece, you know, like I said, it's all like metaphors and it's very dreamlike. There's no text in it. I'm not saying any words. There's some words in the music, but it's not considered like the script or anything. It's just kind of more an impression. But yeah, I hope to kind of have a slightly more hopeful ending. But I think again, it's the emotional arc thing, and how I make that choice. But yeah,
Okay,
endings are hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as an audience, I feel like we don't know the difference.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I don't know.
I don't know. No, you're right. Maybe we
Yeah.
do. Maybe we're like, I really needed more.
Yeah, I feel like
Or
I
that
have
was too
made
much.
pieces. Yeah, I feel like I have made pieces in the past that has a lot of endings, where it's like it feels like it ends and it like starts again and ends again. Because I'm like, oh, it needs a little bit more,
Yeah.
a little like emotional dimension over here.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Miwa. Thank you
you.
all. Yes, let's give another round of applause. Thank you. As a reminder, again, the show is starting tomorrow night, 8, Saturday at 8, Sunday at 3, mdclivearts.org for tickets and student discount, student tickets, free student tickets. Thank you for having me.
So on behalf of the Honors College, we would like to thank you with a certificate of appreciation for spending your afternoon and talking about your history and your work. And we just want to thank you, and I hope you enjoyed staying with us as much as we did with you.
So thank you very much again, and as you all know, on the screen, take a picture of it. Jenny, are the tickets available to MDC students and their families, or is it, can the students get 2 tickets for, you know, their mom, their dad, their dog? No, well, not their dog. But
So student tickets, every student with a valid MDC ID is entitled to 1 ticket.
got it. Okay, perfect. So get your tickets soon.
Get your tickets soon, because it's a small house.
Perfect.
But so, yeah.
And they can get all online.
You can, so what you can do is you go, I'm sorry, we have a new box office system, so I'm like, how do you do it? Go to our site, click on buy tickets. You will select your tickets and your date and all that. For a student ticket, you'll have to put in the code. You may have to do 2 orders to buy for other people.
Okay. So
I'm not sure.
Yeah, no problem. Any questions, to see me tomorrow as well, and we can work through that as well. But thank you. Let's give Ms. Mima another round of applause. Thank you. So that completes our colloquium session for today. Thank you for coming, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you.